Hello, my friends, and welcome to Spaniard School of the Student Podcast. I'm your host, Charlie, the Spaniard Benjamin, former Spanish teacher and UFC fighter. Quick reminder, use the information below, whether you're watching on YouTube or whether you're listening on your podcast app. Use those links below to subscribe to both my YouTube channel as well as the Spaniard School Podcast. New episodes every week coming out on Tuesday. And today's episode number 65 is titled Why You Should Be More Like a Buffalo. For real. So it's not a joke when I say that you should be more like a buffalo. And I don't mean that you should be dirty and have hair that's all in knots and sometimes rubbed off and caked in mud. I just went to a local wildlife park and we saw some buffaloes. And I'm not talking about being all dirty and rough like a buffalo in the outdoors. What I am talking about is how buffaloes deal with storms. And I actually mean how buffaloes deal with storms, rainstorms, thunderstorms, and how you and I can apply that idea, that philosophy and strategy to our own lives, to apply to the storms, the challenges, obstacles, difficult times that you and I face in our lives. And I first heard this, I'm going to say 5 to 6 years ago. And for the longest time, I thought, wow, that's awesome. But I really didn't know if it was true or not. So I did some research and I found out that it is true. I was recently out in Colorado. I was speaking out in Colorado doing an assembly, a couple assemblies, and I struck up contact with an old friend of mine, a former wrestler of mine. And just the other day, he texted me and said, "Hey, I'm sure you know about this, but it's really neat. It's about buffaloes and storms." And so I thought that's a perfect topic to bring to the Spaniard show. So if you just give a quick Google, which I did, to buffalo in the storm. So if you're watching the video on YouTube, you see me looking at my screen, looking this up. So it says, be the buffalo and face life's storms. And then a little bit below, I see, why do buffaloes run into the storm? And this is where you and I can start to take this actual thing they do and apply it to our lives. It says, while bison are similar in some ways to cattle, there are significant differences. For example, bison will turn into a storm rather than drifting with the wind because they instinctively know that walking into the storm will get them out of the weather quicker. So I want you to think of this. I want you to imagine that you're a buffalo standing in the middle of a field and you look up to your left and you see this storm cloud coming toward you from the left. So you can turn and walk to the right, but what's going to happen is I'm going to be walking to the right and this storm is going to be coming from the left toward the right. I'm going to be walking and it's eventually just going to get over top of me and follow me the entire way that I'm walking until it passes by. But if the storm is coming from the left to the right and I start moving to my left, and if you're watching on the YouTube video, you can see me doing this, I'm going to pass through it quicker, right? Rather than being like this and kind of traveling together to the right, I'm walking under it to the left and getting through it quicker. And if you have trouble visualizing what I just probably poorly described, give it a quick Google. I'm sure on YouTube you could type it in or you could read it. Just type in how buffalo handle storms. So now I want you to think about your life. I want you to think about a storm, something impending, something that's hanging over your head that's difficult and challenging. I'm going to say this because I'm sure many of you can relate to this. You made a bad choice at school. You know that your parents are going to find out. You don't want to tell them, so you just sit on it. Or you hope that they don't find out. It's got to take some time to pass through all the teachers, to the principal, to your mom or your dad. Now you have the option of just like sitting and fretting, worrying, being anxious, etc. Or you could walk up to your parents and say, "Hey, parent, I did this. Very sorry. I learned from it. You're going to find out about it, so I wanted to approach you first." Then it's no longer hanging over your head. You know, so many times in life, nobody's perfect. We make poor choices. We do things that have consequences, oftentimes negative consequences. It could be having a difficult conversation. Maybe you have a friend, you have another friend. Maybe you and your other friend did something that was cruel to this friend, and this friend is eventually going to find out about it. You can let it hang over your head, or you can approach that other friend and say, "Hey, friend, this is what I did. I'm very sorry for it. I know you're going to find out. Even if you weren't, I wanted to tell you directly." That's what it means about facing life storms. If there's an uncomfortable conversation that you know you should have, but you don't want to have, If you have a test coming up and you don't want to study and you're putting it off, face that storm, do the studying, do the preparation. If you have one of those conversations, look, I'm a husband, I am a father of 2 little kids, I coach, I run a business. There's a lot of things going on in my life, and there's a lot of things that hang over my head. I'll take training, for example. Every morning I get up and train. I don't want to train every morning. That's like a storm hanging over my head. And rather than run from it and delay it and delay it and delay it, I turn and face it. I walk down the steps, I go into the gym, and I train. So that's what I mean when I say, as the title says, why you should be more like a buffalo. Cows, on the other hand, they'll turn and walk with the storm. They'll walk with the storm, and they're under that rain, they're under that storm much longer than if they would just turn and face it and walk through it. So that, my friends, is what I mean when I say that you and I should be more like a buffalo in all seriousness. The next time a storm is coming your way, one of life's storms, which it inevitably, without a doubt, will come your way, rather than turning and walking the other way, turn and face it. It's that same way with fear. And I may record a separate episode on this in the future, but I heard Jamie Foxx, who's a famous actor, comedian, singer, do it all. I heard him on a podcast one time, and he posed the question, what's on the other side of fear? And I think in that interview, he said nothing. That means that we fret and we're scared and we worry. But when we stand up and we face that fear, on the other side of it, we realize, hey, I could handle that. There's nothing. I'm doing it. Yes, it's challenging. Yes, it's tough, but I'm doing it. I also think of it another way, and this is like facing the storm. What's on the other side of fear? Everything. Once you make a decision to not run from fear, once you make a decision to not run from life's challenges, you'll realize, holy cow, this is everything that I want as a human, to live my life fully, to express myself fully, to chase my goals, my dreams, and my ambitions. And I know that I'm going to fail. I know that I'm going to have setbacks. I know that there's going to be storms, but I also know that I can be like a buffalo, and I can turn and I can face those storms. With that comes unbelievable self-confidence. And with that self-confidence comes a lot of happiness and joy and fulfillment. So I hope you enjoyed this brief episode here. And I hope you believe me when I now say that you and I should be more like a buffaloes, in that we turn and we face the storm and we walk through the storm to get it over with quicker. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, I am the Spaniard, former Spanish teacher and UFC fighter. I traveled the country speaking in schools, middle schools, high schools, and elementary schools, doing assemblies, sharing my story and the lessons that I've learned along the way, through teaching, through wrestling, through professional fighting, through starting and running my own business, hosting a YouTube channel, having a podcast, 2 podcasts. I share all those lessons and more through my books, through my online programs, social media, and my in-person assemblies. If you're an educator and you're interested in bringing me to your school, please go to charliespaniard.com, click on speaking, fill out the short form, and I'll get back to you. Again, I encourage you to subscribe to my youtube.com/charliespaniard, as well as Spaniard School, the student podcast. All that information is below in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in. See you, Buffaloes.